Welcome to MAC Bleu, the cutting-edge podcast for the nation's builders, merging the realms of construction with exciting advancements in technology. Join us on a thrilling journey where we delve into the dynamic world of blockchain, AI, the Metaverse, virtual and augmented reality, and their transformative impact on the industry. Our engaging discussions span a wide spectrum, covering not only construction, economic development, supply chain, and market segments, but also exploring the vibrant tapestry of diversity within the construction landscape. We shed light on the intersection of local politics and its profound influence on the construction sector, while championing the remarkable contributions of women and minorities in construction. For all things MAC Bleu, head to www.macandbleu.com, and don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. I'm your host, JJ Levinsky. Now let's get into it. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of MAC Bleu. I'm JJ Levinsky, your host, CEO and co-founder of Blue Wave. Today I have Glenn Williamson on, and for those of you, I'm going to give you a little background here. If you know Mr. Trudeau up in Canada, well, that he doesn't hold a candle to Glenn. Glenn basically is more popular than probably he is. So I was fortunate enough to get introduced to Glenn quite a few months ago, reached out to him. He was nice enough to accept my phone call. We had a very civil conversation, and lo and behold, here he is. And by the end of this podcast, you'll be blown away with how much he knows and how much he can educate all of us on the interconnection between, I would say, Canada and Arizona in specific, not only from commerce, but IP, human capital, all the cool things that are happening in that realm. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say, as an ex-Minnesota, Wisconsin guy, you know, we're basically kind of dual citizens the way it is as part of Canada. And I'm floored by how much the connection is between either Canada and the upper Midwest and Arizona, because everyone thinks it's a snowbird thing, but then it transcends into so many things. For instance, in the construction space, I always joked that when I was a kid and I saw how the connection, I'll just use Minneapolis to Phoenix, and now you look at the bellies of most of the larger construction companies that spawned here in the 70s and 80s, they all have a tie either back to either Canada or the upper Midwest. And it was really simple. All of us wanted to get the hell out of winter, come down here, and then they became capitalists. So with that, I'm going to introduce Glenn, and then we'll get to dive into his background. But I should actually give you his formal title. He is the CEO of the CABC, which is the Canada-Arizona Business Council. And we're going to hear about a bunch of other cool things that this gentleman's involved with. So welcome, Glenn.
Super. Glad to be here. Thrilled.
All right. We got to go back a little bit in time, give everyone kind of a grounding and kind of a context. Give the audience just a little bit of background, if you can, back to even the entertainment industry and if you call it the hotel and restaurant or whatever. And how in the hell did you ever get to Arizona in the first place?
Rupert Murdoch.
Okay.
Rupert hired me, and that's how I ended up down here way back 36 years ago. So growing up in Canada, I'm an 8th generation Montrealer. I was in the Canadian military up there. Got to grade 12, got to go and play in the military for a while, came out of that, played in hotels for a while, and worked my way up from nothing. And eventually one thing led to another. I was with Four Seasons in an executive role, and I got an opportunity to come down here to take, in the old days, JJ, before computers, travel agencies used a book called the Hotel Travel Index. It was a big old book, about 10,000 pages. And we down here, I negotiated off Alasma Arabians, a bunch of their office space in North Scottsdale. And we set up a group there digitizing that book, putting it onto laser discs to be then played on IBM Info Windows, which was the first time we had literally transcended to putting a medium onto discs, onto a computer, which then moved onto the internet down the road as we started going through. So it was very, very early stuff. And I ended up down here and set up a bunch of companies and worked for companies like Club Med around the world, helping them, and ended up with some hotel groups down here, and then started companies like Go Video, which goes all the way back to the dual deck VCR. And then we created Go Video Interactive, which was the first time we took a dual deck VCR, put digital tapes in it, then laser discs, and hooked it up to a computer again. And that was the early system for editing bays in Los Angeles. Oh. So we created the very, very early editing bays for the major upgrades in Los Angeles. Came out of Arizona.
By the way, I forgot to mention one thing. For all you hockey fans out there, Glenn, if you're listening, tough shit. If you're watching, you get to see it. He's
It's my Don Cherry look.
He's giving the Don Cherry a big salute. And for all of us hockey fans, he walked in. I was just like, hallelujah, brother. Anyway. For representing. So
almost had a stick with me. I came very, very close.
All right. So how and when did the transition go from that industry to all of these? I look at you as like this super ambassador between the entrepreneurial world that is Canada to Arizona. Did it fall in your lap? Did you pursue it? I mean, what's kind of the story behind that connection?
I wish things fell in my lap. Everything I had to create from zero, absolutely nothing. So
then we got the right guy sitting in the studio.
I believe that at the end of the day, say yes to everything and work your way to no. And if you do that, opportunities will open up everywhere. So nothing was ever given to me. I took everything. I created everything. So I've created somewhere north of 25 companies.
25?
When I was an investment banker, I owned an investment bank in New York, and we probably financed another 100 companies. So I believe one of the greatest things that I learned coming down here 36 years ago from Canada was the United States of America is still the only country in the world that promotes entrepreneurialism the way it does in the United States. The U.S., no matter how often people beat each other up about our politics and other problems we might have, I travel all over the world. I've had offices all over the world. There is still no country that breeds entrepreneurialism and the ability to create your own destiny like the United States of America.
So I think everyone would want to know, are you a dual citizen? How does it work?
So I am. I was actually making military satellites at one time. I bought a company, and we started building all sorts of stuff. And the FBI came in one day and said, "Mr. Williamson, you're CEO of a company that's building classified military stuff. We think we should have a chat." And the next thing I knew, I got a top secret clearance and SCI, secure compartmentalized clearance. And I became an American citizen simultaneously, all at one fell swoop.
Oh, nice.
So I could go out and hang up at NORAD and go into Cheyenne Mountain and zip around the globe in C-130s and do things that only Americans can do. And it's not that you become a dual citizen. It's something of a misnomer.
Okay, educate me.
If you are a Canadian down here and you become an American, you take an oath of allegiance to the United States that allows you and disavows you from being anything else other than an American. Canada just happens to say, okay, that's kind of cool. We still like you. You can be a Canadian. But in the States, you stand in front of a judge and say, I disavow any country I am with, and I am now an American. So the concept of being a dual citizen is a misnomer. Whether you're Mexican or Canadian, it doesn't really matter. The minute you carry a U.S. passport, you are a U.S. citizen. Your country of origin might still recognize you. And when I was a diplomat for Canada down here, I was the honorary consul for Canada for 8 years there. It was one of those nomenclatures that a lot of people would throw around, and they weren't paying full attention to the fact that, no, you gave up Canada, you're now here, and I appreciate you still want to keep the rod and the line in the Canadian pool, but here's what you can do. So you then become ambassadors, if you will, which is the area of the northern parts of the United States that you come from. Canada and the U.S. have got a great relationship on the northern border. On the southern border, people think we don't, but in actual fact,
we do.
We do.
Yeah.
So if you're living in Toronto or Montreal, the odds are you're going to Florida or you're coming to Arizona, or your parents did, or your parents' parents did. That then transcends from a snowbird to a homeowner, of which we have 100,000 houses owned here by Canadians, and that then transcends to that homeowner sitting on a board of a company that has to expand in the United States. And when they're looking at which state to expand to, the odds are that board member is going to have an influence, and that's why we have 500 Canadian companies in Arizona. We only have 35 Mexican, but 120 British, but 140 French, maybe 100 German. 500 Canadian companies. And Canada, no other country, including Taiwan, even with TSMC, is the largest foreign direct investor in the United States, and specifically in the state of Arizona.
Equate that to, give me some more numbers, Glenn. What does that equate to either, what do I say, like investment revenue or?
So let's go back 50 years. We did an analysis. Canada has $500 billion invested in the state of Arizona.
$500 billion.
$500 billion. So my company alone, I'm chairman of EPCOR, the water company.
Right.
We've invested north of $3.5 billion in the state of Arizona. But understand that we in the business community do this. Most 85% to 90% of all Canadian companies that come down here did not go through any economic development group. Irony of ironies, the State Commerce Authority is run by a Canadian woman. And we help her with the Canada-Arizona Business Council, which is CEOs. And we have found to a T that Canadian companies would play golf. A CEO would play golf with an American lawyer at Snell and Wilmer, and off they would go. And they would put a company together, and they didn't need anything. They had money to bring down. All 5 Canadian banks are bigger in the United States than they are in Canada. Bank of Montreal is massive in the state of Arizona. They bought M&I. They bought Bank of the West. The largest municipal bank financing bank for the state of Arizona's counties and cities is the Royal Bank of Canada, which, by the way, my grandfather used to be chairman of. So I came from that part of one of my family members.
See, I told you this guy's royalty, everyone.
But I'm still a hockey player.
Well, you take the boy out of Canada, you can't take Canada out of the boy, right?
There you go.
Yeah.
That's it.
All right. I love it. Well, those are awesome numbers. Let's dive into, if you don't mind, Glenn, let's take a couple. Take the EBCOR thing, if you can, peel that onion back a little bit. Talk about, I think everyone would want to know the why. I think that's a great story. If you can talk about kind of the why of the water and the utilities or whatever. And then I think the other maybe industry I want to go into is a little bit of the mining and explain, because I don't think the audience really understands the influence of the mining industry here in the state of Arizona, and particularly I love it because I'm sure you've got the data on the difference between Canadian and call it the Americas, like who actually owns and controls most of that. So if take either one and peel that back and educate the audience, please.
So let's start with mining, because right now everybody is topic du jour is electric vehicles.
Yes, sir.
Electric vehicles require batteries that require certain types of minerals. So if you're truly going to exploit that, then you're going to have to ramp up mining in a big, big way. If you're truly going to take oil and gas off the market, or attempt to, then you're going to have to ramp up mining either way. So it's a lesser of multiple evils. So, if you take one, you're going to have to give on the other. And in copper, it's a big one. 50% of the mines in Arizona are Canadian owned.
50%.
50%. 80% of the mines in Sonora, Mexico are Canadian owned. Both states are the largest mining states in their respective countries. 90% of those percentage numbers trade on the Toronto Stock Exchange, because it is the last standing venture capital exchange in North America. When Sarbanes-Oxley came in, Denver went to bed. We lost all those junior oil companies, all those junior exploration companies, and they went to the pink sheets. And the pink sheets, you're treading on lighter stuff there. You can't do a bunch. So Canada and the Toronto Stock Exchange have been down and active in this region. When I started the CABC 20 years ago, the CEO of the TSX was my first member.
Wow. Along
with a couple of others. There was like a handful of us that started. So mining is really, really important. So Canadian capital has been funding this. Companies like Hud Bay that are down here, a lot of that. When you start taking a look at the South 32s of the world and all these other, like they're Australian, but if you look at their financial structure, you'll see a lot of it went through Toronto.
Got it.
Toronto is Canada's financial capital. It used to be Montreal when I was growing up. Now Toronto is. And it doesn't really matter where you are in the world. If you're a mining company, you go to Toronto. And therefore, the investment banks, the accounting firms, the lawyers, everybody is there ready to turnkey you. Here's a couple of $1 million, go poke a hole in the ground and see what you can get. You can't get that in the States with Sarbanes-Oxley. There's just too much regulation. So Arizona is sitting on, no pun intended, a gold mine that is truly a copper mine. And copper is very significant in the new battery segment of EVs. So we're going to watch that grow. But everybody has been looking at mining like it's a nana poo-poo, go away, it's dirty.
Not in my backyard thing.
Where we come from, drones that we all watch fighting the Ukrainian war were all invented in mines because they're 7,000 feet below the ground, and autonomous vehicles come from mining. So mining is no longer this antiquity of somebody with a horse and a pickaxe. Some of the most state-of-the-art automation is used in mining. And we are doing that in Arizona. So I sit now on the board of U of A for their tech park, and we're bringing in mining company after mining company, technologists to take the mining side and technologically bring it up. So it's even further up in software and what you can see with different types of scanning devices. All of that is moving at Mach speed and will be massively instrumental should and if a transition from oil and gas occur. And I say that with a should and if because there is no plausible way that it can happen within the government's timeframes. It's just physically impossible. It's like turning the Titanic around in the Straits of Hormuz. Can't be done. Just
that was the best analogy I've heard in a long time.
Cannot be done. So in Arizona, we're sitting here with mining being very, very significant. So then you fast forward to water. And water, the Colorado River, I've rafted it 17 times, I think, or some number. My wife has. I think I've been down 8. And every time I go down...
Did she go with you, or did she send you down like...
No, she...
You know what I'm getting at?
Jump in the pool.
Glenn, get the hell out of here.
That was actually our first date. You're on your own. Where am I? What do I do now?
Well, if you survive that was the blissful marriage, right?
So we say it has been. So we now sit here with a wonderful lady that has done her job of moving water into a region that has outgrown her. So it's not that, we do have problems with the Colorado. These are not going to get fixed in the next 10, 20, or 30 years. It's just not going to happen. So therefore, in water, you have 3 phases to it. You have phase 1, which is probably the most topical. Everybody wants to put green grass in and do nice, lovely things. That'll affect about 0.2% of the outcome. The next
repeat that, because I think that...
So changing your lawns and doing all of that, it's lovely to do, and it really looks like you're helping.
0.2.
But at the end of the day, the numbers are very, 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 very small in comparison. So it's the psychological impact of doing the right thing versus, remember that 75% of all our water is consumed by agriculture in the States. So the other 25%, growth. Now what we're starting to see are things like TSMC turning around saying, I need more water. Oh, you can't give it to me. I'm now going to do 100% recycling. The same thing with Nestle. The same thing with White Claw. These are million square foot plants that are modifying their systems internally. So phase 1 is the consumer changing their patterns, which is just good psychological shifting to do the right thing. That will pay off over time, but it's longer. The second thing is, how do you maximize commercial use of water, and how do you take care of the existing static aquifers that we have?
There you go.
Because remember, they're finite. Now, you can refill them, and you can do all sorts of fun stuff. That's phase 2. That will probably be the amount of recycling we're doing in aquifers right now. Most people would never even have a clue, but it's pretty significant. And that will get better and better and better. The reality is, though, that when you look at a 100-year water table adjustment that the governor put forward and said, we're out of water in 100 years, it didn't put into place anything we're doing to fix that. So transparency-wise, a good model to put forward, changes people's thinking. But from an economic development point of view, it's a hindrance to them because then the psychology of East Coast newspapers, competitive states, competitive countries, competitive industries go, aha, you guys are in trouble, therefore my company, or I'm not going to send companies to you. So that means at some moment in time, water augmentation is going to occur in the state. And that means water will have to come in from outside the boundary of the state. There's only a few places that can come from. Mississippi, Missouri, the Columbia, the Pacific Ocean, or the Sea of Cortez. After that, it gets pretty funky. So we are all now in the middle of studying this, trying to figure out what is the right best decision. JJ, one of the things that we have done in Arizona really, really well is we've studied water, and there's really not much we don't know about it. What we have a lack of right now is leadership in making difficult water decisions. We have all the data that we could possibly imagine at our universities and our water groups. But the really, really tough thing is for someone to sit down and say, this $100 billion worth of semiconductor activity we're doing here is probably going to double over the next 10 or 20 years, and that's going to probably draw some more, and we're probably going to add more, and we're not going to take away from agriculture, because taking away from agriculture is also a big mistake. So we're going to have to get better at everything we do. But at some point, the state of Arizona will have to go into water augmentation.
Okay.
So WIFA was created at the state. That was when Ducey gave the $1 billion originally to it. Most of that's been clawed back, and what was left has been dispersed. However, we now have a call for information coming out of WIFA on water augmentation. So they're not just focusing on the short or the medium term anymore. They're now looking at what we want them to look at. And this is not a problem that is isolated to Arizona. This is synonymous across the United States. The word infrastructure financing has been left out. We do it all over the world. We finance it all over the world, but yet we don't do it in many, many parts of the United States. So in the state of Arizona, we're pretty good on transportation. We're pretty good on cell and communications, but we're operating in a 1940s water infrastructure. So the last time when Roosevelt built some dams and CAP was slapped up, and now the big thing is we're going to add another 30 feet to a dam that will take 10 years to build. That's all good stuff, but we need to amplify it concurrently with the amplification of growth in the fastest growing state in the union. And that has to occur. Capital markets around the world recognize that.
Right.
So what's interesting is I just came back from meeting with $400 and $500 billion funds in Canada, and these people are progressively long-term thinkers.
Okay.
And we are on their map. They're just not sure what to invest in yet, because I believe you're one of two things every day of the week. You're a buyer or a seller of something. There's nothing else in between. Hyperbole and a lot of noise maybe. But you're either a buyer or a seller. We have a buyer's market in what I would call the institutional infrastructure pension markets around the globe.
Okay.
Because they all recognize the America that you and I live in is going through a change again back to growth. And this change, while we're in the middle of watching it be very messy, an outside viewer is going, oh shit, America's at it again. The country that makes every mistake first, but then the last mistake it makes is the precursor to some massive growth pattern that occurs here. No other country in the world can do it. No other country in the world does do it. A couple have tried, it doesn't work. We are right now on the cusp of that, which is why you've seen the White House come out with a few things that are trying to set the tone and tenor on infrastructure. Well, here we sit in a young state with a progressively minded entrepreneurial thinking, because we're still a little bit agriculture, we're still a little bit mining, and we're still small company oriented. Mm-hmm. But we are now about to go into the big leagues on infrastructure, where I need $10 billion for this, or I need $5 billion for that, or I need to put a train between Tucson and Phoenix. That'll be $6 billion. We are not yet acclimatized to asking for big dollars. And that is something that we have to shift, so that if I'm sitting in Toronto and I'm 34 years old and I've got $20 billion to spend of a $400 billion fund, I don't want to see a bunch of guys and gals come in asking for $200 million. I don't have the bandwidth. I want to see 20 people come in and ask for $1 billion. I'd prefer one person comes in and does 20. So these people are looking for people to walk in and say, JJ, I need $6 billion for that project in the state of Arizona, which ironically and concurrently goes with what's going on in the semiconductor business. So when TSMC got announced, Intel made a concurrent announcement. Well, what most people don't know is that of that $30 billion announcement, $14 billion came from Toronto, from Brookfield, and was brokered by Bank of Montreal. Most people don't know that, because nobody in economic development did it. It was done CFO to CFO. It was Bank of Montreal knowing that Intel needed something, and you're looking at Brookfield's about $1 trillion entity in Toronto, so $14 billion is a rounding error, and they
just like Sean's paycheck, right?
They decided to throw
a B to a T. That's
it gets lost in the dots. So this is all starting to transpire, which has made Arizona, it's put Arizona in a really unique position. Its relationship with Sonora is not just about people on a border anymore. It's now this border and this part of the region that will help in developing cost-effective manufacturing, which is maquiladores on steroids. And the reason I know that is I've been down to Sonora enough times, and I'm sitting there waiting for the governor or I'm waiting for the mayor of Hermosillo. There's a German, a French, a Spanish, and a Japanese guy sitting in the lobbies to come in to structure something in Sonora to sell into the United States. They don't see the border as a problem.
No.
So they look at it and go, how do I get away from ships going back and forth, and how do I set up a structured environment near the 800-pound gorilla?
There comes a time when dreams become a reality, when you see your vision materialize into a true work of art. And the only way to get there is to choose a general contractor who shares that same vision and knows how to bring it to life. At Blue Wave, we aren't so big that we've forgotten where we've come from, and we aren't so small that we can't care for your projects regardless of their size. When your vision deserves safety, perfection, timeliness, and expertise in order to become a reality, trust Blue Wave to get it done right the first time.
How, if I can take a moment,
Sure.
Glenn, on this show, we've talked a lot about, and I'm not smart, but I've picked up enough of other guests talking about that whole northern Mexico. I brought it up numerous times. You're sitting here, and from what I'm hearing, you're validating that, yes, that isn't some pie in the sky. It's been happening, and it's going to continue to happen. And much like we talked about, the people that grew up close to the borders don't see the borders, like what I would call the people that are lost in the gray middle, where they like to polarize it
Correct.
for their own means and methods, whatever. And we can tell that the media has some impact on that as well. So that northern Mexico thing, you're sitting here telling me in the audience that is as close to 100% true, and it's not if, it's when and how fast and how quickly. Is that a fair statement?
So there's two things, this love-hate relationship that people have with Mexico, yet we still put NAFTA through 2.0, and we've got the biggest trading bloc. I believe that the globe trades horizontally or vertically, depending on the time.
Good point.
So right now, if you're in Europe, you've got a bit of a mess going on there with the Ukraine.
You do.
And Germany is having a bit of a problem with pipelines being turned off and going back to coal. Therefore, prices are changing. And Europe has got something that's complex. China, I don't need to say anymore. China has got the biggest PR problem I have ever seen of a country. It's not really slowing down their production yet, but they have another problem. They have an aging workforce, and they have no kids behind it. So their de-kidding concept that they did is not working for them. In the next 20 years, China is going to be in a world of hurt for a labor force.
Yep.
The same thing is happening in other parts of Canada right now. Canada's aging workforce is not having kids. As more and more women have come into the workforce, they don't want to have kids. So we're starting to see some demography that is changing the way things and workforces are evolving. Mexico, on the other hand, is producing an enormously younger population. So America's moaning and groaning about Mexico and Mexicans coming in, we need to rethink. 90% of these people are okay. 10% are bad. But Chicago's a bad place too, and so is San Francisco. I wouldn't want to live in New York right now. I live in Hermosillo over living in New York. So I'm sitting here looking at this and I'm going, so what's the secret sauce to this? You've got people that want to come here, that want to work, that are young. So it's our system at the border that we don't know how to process them. We don't know how to put them into the workforce quickly. So this is actually a governmental stalemate that we've created on the border, whereas other countries around the world would kill to have a workforce coming to them as you migrate from a consumer nation to a manufacturing nation. And so these are economics that no matter how many ways the government gets in the way, the private sector is overcoming it. piece by piece by piece. And we're seeing it at every level. It's no different than education. If you take a look at, we're producing tons of people at our universities with degrees that are absolutely useless.
I'm glad you said it.
Well, they are.
Yeah.
The majority now we need doctors, lawyers, accountants. We need all the professions that come out. We do MBAs, but there's the majority of liberal arts, are all working in Starbucks. How's that 4-year debt working for you? So you're now 19, 20-year-old with a debt that you shouldn't have. And the kid beside you that came out of high school is now a plumber making $85,000 or $90,000 with no debt. If you go back to the 1940s and the 50s, and part of the 60s, the whole concept of coming out of high school was you went to become a professional. You wanted to be not a dentist. You wanted to be an engineer that worked in but not designing. You wanted to be a plumber. You wanted to do things that made you money. So now we're in this position where we have maxed out what we can pull out of colleges. We have maxed out what we can pull out of trade schools. I've got Bombardier, a Canadian company, sitting down in Tucson with 1 million square feet, and the tech school right beside it produces 60 or 70 graduates a year. They need that a week. And that's just one company. Then I've got Raytheon down there doing the same thing. Then I've got IBM down there, each of them needing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. So we've lost our educational. You remember in grades 11 and 12 in the old days, you had shop where you would learn how to make things and do things with your hands. And then people would come out and do stuff. That is now going to go back in. And the reason I know this is the politics and governments have kept it out. But the money that is going into all the schools from the private sector that requires workers has gone skyrocketing in an uncoordinated fashion. So TSMC might give $1 million to a school district. Please, I beg of you, give me a couple of your grade 12 graduates. I will train them. I will train them with you. I'll move them over there. So now what we're getting into is how do we scale up workforce development in high schools? Mm-hmm. And it may be even all the way K through 12, where we're trying to put people into a workforce, because at the end of the day, our colleges, our community colleges, and our trade schools might represent 20% of the workforce. They're not doing the other 80% of the work that needs to get done. That's something that when did it become bad to be a plumber making $100,000 a year with a grade 12 education?
And have no debt.
I have a grade 12 education. I didn't get past grade 12. I didn't get to university. I make more money than anybody I know that has a degree. And I'm sitting here going, so what is the difference between
And he can buy jackets like that too.
What is the difference between someone like this or like that? It's attitude.
Yes.
So we produce, the Canada Arizona Business Council, we have a non-profit, we are a non-profit, but our fundraiser, we do at Scottsdale. I started in 2016, and I got together with some jet owners, and we decided we all like jets, and we're playing around with them. And I said, you know what, guys, why don't we put a bunch of jets here? Because 87% of all private international jet traffic at Scottsdale Airport is Canadian.
Say that again?
87% of all private international jet traffic at Scottsdale Airport is Canadian. And I said, you know what? The odds are we know most of these people. So
I would hope so.
Why don't we do something around that? So we created this event, and we put 20 or 30 jets out there, and we open it up to jet owners. And the theory is we'll pull them in, and we will have a chat with them and collect them. The majority of them have houses at Desert Mountain, Troon. They're up in the higher end area. But they would normally land their plane, go straight up, and not communicate with anybody in between. Okay. So this, Ducey and I were walking through it one time, and Doug goes, Glenn, why is nobody talking to me? And I said, Doug, they have people to talk to your people. I said, what's really important is you tell them what you want.
Yeah.
Because these people can write checks. So what we do is raise money for Luke Air Force Base for 290 kids. There's a kitchen in the school there for this little kids school. These are the kids of the pilots and the maintenance people on the F-35s and F-16s. And this young lad is cooking 900 meals a day in a kitchen that is just a piece of crap. So we're going to raise money and build a new kitchen so these kids are getting good organic meals so when the pilot gets into his F-35 and that picture of his twins that are 5 and 6 years old are right there, he knows that they're being fed and looked after back at the base Well, he goes to protect America. And that's something that we believe in enormously. And one of the things that we found was there's not just wealth that resides in Arizona. There's transient wealth that comes through, decision makers that come through. Many of your viewers, not as well as your listeners, will know people that come through here all the time. And getting them to be captivated and involved in the local philanthropic community is massively important to me as a person. And that's why I was part of the zoo, and that's why I've been part of a ton of philanthropic stuff. And it's not about the money that I give. It's about how to influence other people to learn the art of giving. And Canadians that come down here are very good at this. So we have done nothing but, for year over year over year, raised money through our organization to give to different organizations in the Valley. And that's something that I've challenged other countries, other groups that are here. If you're going to come here and you're going to make money here, then give back. You have to give back. Otherwise, you're an interloper. You're just coming, you're taking, and you're walking away. So make sure that if you do come here and you take advantage of this incredible place to do business and make money, that you are giving back into that community at the same time.
That's well stated. Listen, I was just flowing listening to you and just mesmerized by all of it because it's good stuff, and I don't mean to be patronizing.
No.
One of the things that I've been dying to interrupt you to ask is, let's go back maybe 10 minutes or so, is I find and I think you will have a much better and more educated answer to this question or kind of a rhetorical statement is, I always hear people talking about the difference of how capital and entrepreneurship, even if it wants to overcome slow and poor performance within government policy and agency, you're telling me, I thought I heard a nugget there that JJ, it will always happen. In other words, that capital and that entrepreneurship has a way, they see the cracks in that and they will find a way through that. Again, through all your world travels and all these, trillions of dollars that you're exposed to with very smart and intellectual people, how can we make sure that Arizona doesn't fall into that trap where we just become so policy driven that we become secluded from our own success based on the opportunities that lie out there? I hope I'm framing the question to you properly. I'm just curious to hear what you know from your experience of how we can do that.
So attitude is altitude, number one.
Okay.
And if you rely on government for anything you are doing, you will fail. Their job is not to make you successful. Their job is a very finite thing that every once in a while gets a little blurry on the edges. But their job is to look after a specific set of problems that they deal with. Anybody that uses government policies or anything as an excuse is a failure as a salesperson. So it's their own failures trying to blame somebody else. People that are successful overcome problems no matter how massive they are.
True.
People overcome deaths of spouses. People somehow overcome deaths of children. People somehow overcome. So unless you are passionate about what you are doing and not entitled or deemed entitled for someone else to take care of your problem that somehow you have inherited, you need to own every single problem and you need to own every single solution. And if more people do that, you will find less reliance on a government. And the less reliance on a government isolates their tasks to the more mundane things that they really need to pay attention to. Every time government starts to stretch itself and get so involved in social issues, two things happen. One, you encourage those people you are helping not to help themselves. And two, you encourage the government to do more than it is either fiscally capable to do or intellectually capable to do. And that is where we start to bump into problems. And the private sector in the United States has an ability to solve its own problems if and when generationally they own them.
They own them. There you go.
Otherwise, if they're deemed to be entitled or they're deemed to live in a service industry, they'll never solve their own problems.
There comes a time when dreams become a reality, when you see your vision materialize into a true work of art. And the only way to get there is to choose a general contractor who shares that same vision and knows how to bring it to life. At Blue Wave, we aren't so big that we've forgotten where we've come from, and we aren't so small that we can't care for your projects regardless of their size. When your vision deserves safety, perfection, timeliness, and expertise in order to become a reality, trust Blue Wave to get it done right the first time.
Without keeping score, because that isn't what I'm looking here, but I think the audience would love to. You have a wonderful look under the hood, so to speak, for both the Canadian politics versus the United States and how that transcends to entrepreneurship and capitalism. The statements that you just made, again, we're not here to persecute anything, but if someone from the audience was to ping in right now and say, hey, ask Glenn, like, so is Canada doing it better than the U.S. or vice versa? Or like, what's the, is the Canadian government as bipolar as ours is? Is it divisive? Are they going back to more of a centric model? Or are we going further apart in both countries? How does it look like through your lens with all the travels and interactions that you see worldwide?
So it's not just Canada. There are countries that artificially create entrepreneurialism through subsidies and grants.
Okay.
And what you're doing there is you're taking the incentive away from the person to survive. If I put you on a commission versus a salary, the odds are you're going to perform much better because you have more of an incentive on a day-to-day basis.
Agree.
If I put you on a salary and I guarantee you it as a government that you are going to get paid that, or no matter what, at 55 you will be paid this, or so if you have these fiscal handholds to life to walk through, you're doing two things. You're artificially taking the incentive out of a human being to do better themselves, and you are creating a payment schedule for a government that then forces that government to tax more so they can give more. Now, in a perfect world, you tax less. Why is it that Texas does so well? It doesn't tax at all. Well, surprise, surprise. Entrepreneurialism is everywhere, and therefore taxes are consumptive based, and people consume and pay their taxes, and off they go. The more you have to give government to deploy to other people, and don't get me wrong, there is a very large population that requires all the attention in the world, medically, health-wise, and other. But there is also a big chunk of the population that's right on the bubble that needs to carry its own weight and is not being incentivized to do that. And governments, through programs, some of this gets lost in the middle and it gets blurred. And there are professionals that do nothing but take advantage of this type of a scenario. And I don't envy a government for trying to sort through that kind of stuff. Yeah. It is not an easy thing to do, but Canada and the U.S. are not the only ones going through it. If you're in France or if you're in other parts of the globe, it's astonishing at the same problem. In Canada right now, taxes are about 53%.
Okay, 53.
So recently, they pay a consumptive tax for the transition to a new economy for getting rid of oil and gas of 27 cents a liter. And people have now finally said, you know what, we recognize that it's not going to transition fast enough. Therefore, please get rid of the tax. So now, when you tax too much a constituency, no matter how much you're purporting to help that group through the money that you raise, at a certain moment in time, that taxation becomes a bit burdensome. And people start to ask questions and say, why am I not getting this or why am I getting that? And I think one of the great things about the United States is what we get to watch on TV. And that is we get to watch the U.S. bluntly beat the crap out of itself. There is no other country in the world that can do what we do to ourselves and still come out and win.
Yeah.
It is, but when you're in the middle of it all the time, it looks horrific. But then I'll fly around. I just got back. I spent a bunch of time in France and Spain this year. And the people that were whining and moping about it, I stopped for a minute and I took apart their governments. And the minute you do that, we're just an easy target because we're so transparent. We're on the news all the time. Our media is polarized. We do a bunch of stuff. But at the end of the day, somehow all of that at the right moment in time comes together to solve a problem in the United States. Look how far we pushed ourselves in the Civil War. Survived that. Isn't that? I mean, other countries didn't. The
True.
U.S. survives its own issues that it throws at itself.
And
by the way, Canadians recognize that. So the Canadians that you have down here are the best of the best in Canada. So in Canada right now, you've got 50% of a population that's immigrants 2 generations deep. So those Canadians that are 6 and 7 generations deep are going, maybe I want to go down to the States now. So as much bitching and moaning as goes on about all this, there's still in the back of their minds, the U.S. is a cool place in spite of all of its politics and stuff.
Go back, and I'm going to put I want to say nascent might not be the right word, but go back to when you were talking about why the Canadian companies with these heavy capital stacks. I want to be the devil's advocate and go, all right, Glenn, why are all these companies invested in Arizona and parts of the U.S. are they investing that same kind of money in Canada, or why here and not at home? I think everyone wants to ask that question.
You bet. So what ends up happening is with 40 million people,
Okay.
all being depositing into 5 banks, maybe 30 pension plans. So what you end up with is, because of the smallness of the banking community and the pension community, you end up with very large capital stacks inside both banks and pensions.
Got it.
When you start to invest or reinvest in Canada, your margins of ROI coming in your investments are becoming too small because there's not enough at scale because your population's not big enough.
Pretty easy economic model to follow, yeah.
So when your 800-pound gorilla to the south of you is this giant sucking sound vacuum cleaner going, send us your money, bring us your money.
That's Sean's wallet.
We'll give you an ROI with 2 numbers on it.
Yeah, with 2, yeah.
So the Canadian banking and pension industry is going, you know what? We'll take all the money from up here. We'll send it down there. We'll make a ton. We'll pull back everything we need to make sure that our pensioners and our banks are solid. We'll leave the rest down there and continue to reinvest it. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of investment. Now, what's interesting is Canada has been doing this with countries all around the world. And it does it still to this day. The United States, I think 30% of each of the major pension plans carry that 30% in the States. One, I actually heard 40%.
Really?
For the very, very first time, and that was Caisse de Dépôt in Montreal. They're about a $400 billion fund. 40% of all of their holdings are in the U.S. So now the question becomes which states? And
Got it.
Historically, it was New York and Illinois, and it would be California. So the most recent twists in the wind in the United States, now they're going, okay, wait a minute, we're not looking at Europe, we're not looking at Asia as much. Now we're not quite looking at California, we're not quite looking at New York, we're not looking at Massachusetts as much, we're not looking at Illinois. All right, who's the new cool, kid on the block? And Texas is number 1.
Imagine.
And we are number 2. And the semiconductor thing was like adding sparklers on a cake. I mean, now all eyeballs are over here. So now the hardest part of a sale is getting the attention of a buyer. We've got that. Now we got to figure out what it is we want to sell and what we want to ask these globally sophisticated investors for. And that's going to be the learning curve that we have to crash course here.
We're almost through an episode, but I do want to ask you a couple more questions. One is, I kind of glazed right over this, but Glenn, what do you want to see, or what are your initiatives, or what's your goals for maybe the short and long term of CABC that you founded it? What does it look like over the next few years? Like, let's say 3 to 5 years of what you want to see it grow into, or kind of sustain itself as?
So it'll never go more than 100 members.
Okay.
It's like a Tiger 21
it is.
YPO.
Okay. Got it.
It's like that kind of a group.
I didn't realize that, but thank you for defining that.
So it doesn't publish membership. We're pretty close. But our goals, we put it on our website. We have a new series of initiatives. Mining is one. Water is one. We're about to put one on labor that is out there because we think that's kind of an important one. We're very interested in something we focused on for almost 20 years is increasing connectivity between Arizona and Canada. So when I started this way back when, I think we had about 25 nonstop direct flights a week between Canada and here. We now have 220 nonstop direct flights a week between Canada and here, moving 1 million tourists down here, of which 25% of that are businesses, business people. So that's why first class is now selling out. And that has jumped up. We're also very interested. Trade stays pretty much the same between Canada and Arizona, has for 20 years. So trade's not the big thing. Tourism is up a bit because Canadians are aging, and they want to come down here more. We have a Snowbird Act that a whole bunch of people are working on, including us, to go from 180 days to 240 days for snowbirds because those people have houses down here and they want to spend more time here. So I think that at the end of the day, the really big thing in the relationship between Canada and Arizona is Arizona's projects can put Canadian capital to work, give them an ROI to bring back an investment profit to Canada, and move us economically to the next level because our municipal funding capacities cannot handle the infrastructure asks that are going to be coming. And therefore, we have got to look at public-private partnerships with a leading on private versus public, and then public can come in after us because the public folks should not be the leaders on this.
I'm laughing because by the time your episode with me airs, or with us, we had some individuals you might even know from out east that they were experts in PPP, and we kind of dove into this whole topic.
Big thing.
And it's, boy, I tell you, when you see all these things collide, Glenn, I'm sure you're right there. It's like, this is what we have to, we're gonna do this, and it's not if, this is a when, and when it does, it's like, wow, it could be profound if done correctly.
See, you get it. You're already doing it. Your show is doing it already.
What, geez, this has just been unbelievably educational. I can't thank you enough, but in the short time we have left, what did I fail to ask you, or what would you love to educate the audience or challenge them with about anything that you've been exposed to, or that you want to kind of challenge them to take this and spin it in another way to help? Like you said, if you're not influencing it in a positive way, like give back, what's your call out to the audience?
Don't let somebody else create your destiny. Create your own destiny. There is nothing that you cannot do as a human being. Go out and do it. Stop putting up walls and go and take a risk, take a shot, take a chance, go build something. Look what you've built here. Go do that. That's what your listeners need to do. Success does not come to an individual working for other people for the rest of their lives. People want individual successes so that they can control their own destinies. And that is totally in the hands of your listeners, should they have the intestinal fortitude to stand tall, step out, and go do it.
Thank you so much. One more question, Glenn. What, in your world, if people are inspired by what they're listening to, I know, they can't all call you or contact you, but do you have any groups around you that I could link up when we do when I do the publication of, are there any name support groups that I should be putting out there for entrepreneurial connections that you can think of?
I wish I could, but when we started the Arizona Tech Council, it used to be called the Arizona Software Association. So I was one of the guys that started that way back when.
Okay.
And I watched that now turn into what it's turned into. So it's find like-minded people and get together and have a beer and talk about something you want to create. Get a napkin and a pen out.
And watch some damn hockey.
And go and watch some bloody hockey. There you have it. Somewhere in the third period, you'll come up with your idea.
The only true sport left on this planet. All right. Thanks again, Glenn. It's absolute pleasure to have you on. So
Super.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
You've been listening to the MAC Bleu Show, brought to you by Blue Wave General Contracting. Be sure to subscribe to the MAC Bleu podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Follow JJ Levinsky on LinkedIn and Instagram. Tune in every Monday